Ethan Carter had always preferred silence. That was the entire reason he bought the old cabin tucked away deep in the forests of northern Pennsylvania. After years of living in noisy apartment buildings and crowded suburbs, the isolation felt like freedom. The nearest town was nearly 30 minutes away, and his closest neighbor lived more than a mile down the winding dirt road that disappeared into the trees. Most people thought he was crazy for living there alone. He thought everyone else had forgotten what real peace sounded like. His days followed a simple routine. He worked remotely as a graphic designer, spent his afternoons hiking through the surrounding woods, and ended most evenings sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to nothing but the wind moving through the pines. At night, the forest became completely still. Not eerily quiet, comfortably quiet. Over the 2 years he'd lived there, Ethan had learned to recognize every ordinary sound the woods could produce. Owls calling in the distance, branches swaying during heavy winds, deer moving through fallen leaves. Occasionally, a raccoon would knock over the trash bin outside, or a fox would wander across the clearing behind the house. Nothing about those sounds ever frightened him. Nature made noise. That was normal. What woke him on that October night wasn't. His eyes opened suddenly, as though someone had whispered directly into his ear. For several seconds, he remained perfectly still beneath the blankets, staring into the darkness of his bedroom. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed faintly. 2 a.m. exactly. He frowned. Something had disturbed him. He just wasn't sure what. The house was silent. No wind pressed against the walls. No rain tapped on the roof. The forest outside seemed unusually still. He reached for the glass of water beside the bed and took a slow drink while listening. Nothing. He almost convinced himself he'd simply awakened naturally. Then he heard it. Scratch. The sound came from somewhere outside. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging a piece of metal across rough stone. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Ethan sat upright. That wasn't an animal. He listened more carefully. The sound repeated at a steady rhythm, never becoming louder or softer. Always the same scraping noise, always followed by several slow footsteps. Curiosity quickly replaced his initial confusion. He climbed out of bed and crossed the room toward the bedroom window. The cool glass felt cold beneath his fingertips as he carefully pulled the curtain aside. Moonlight bathed the clearing surrounding the cabin. Everything looked exactly as it should. The old pickup truck sat where he had parked it earlier that evening. Stacks of firewood rested beneath a small shelter beside the porch. Beyond them stretched the dense forest. For a brief moment, he saw nothing unusual. Then movement caught his eye. Near the edge of the clearing stood a massive boulder. It had been there long before the cabin was built, rising nearly 8 feet above the surrounding ground. Moss covered much of its surface, giving it the appearance of a weathered monument slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Something moved beside it. A figure. Tall. Dark. At first, Ethan assumed it was another hiker. Perhaps someone had gotten lost. The person walked slowly around the boulder in a perfect circle, never changing pace. One complete lap. Then another. Then another. The movement felt strangely mechanical, almost ritualistic. The figure never looked away from the rock. It simply continued circling it over and over again. Scratch. The sound came again. This time Ethan saw what caused it. The figure extended one unnaturally long arm as it walked. Its hand remained pressed against the stone, or rather, its claws. Even from the second-floor window, Ethan could clearly see several impossibly long fingers dragging across the surface of the boulder. Each step carved fresh grooves into solid rock. Deep grooves. Stone dust drifted into the moonlight every time the claws scraped across the granite. Ethan's stomach tightened. That shouldn't have been possible. No human hand could carve into solid stone that easily. He leaned closer to the window. The figure remained difficult to identify. It wore dark clothing, or perhaps its body itself was simply that dark. The moon illuminated only parts of its outline. Its proportions seemed wrong, too thin. Its arms appeared unusually long, hanging well below where they should. Its movements lacked any natural rhythm. Yet it continued circling the boulder with unwavering patience. Scratch, step, scratch, step. Again, again, again. Minutes passed. Ethan couldn't pull himself away from the window. His rational mind searched desperately for explanations. Someone using tools, an escaped psychiatric patient, a performance artist. Anything made more sense than what he was watching. Yet none of those explanations survived even a few seconds of honest thought. There were no tools, only claws. There were no flashes of metal. No sounds except those slow, deliberate scratches. He glanced toward his phone on the nightstand. Should he call someone? The sheriff's office? And tell them what, exactly? That someone was walking circles around a rock? He sighed quietly. Maybe the person needed help. Maybe they were sleepwalking. Maybe... Scratch. The sound stopped. The sudden silence felt almost violent. Ethan looked back toward the clearing. The figure had stopped moving. It stood completely motionless beside the boulder, its arms slowly lowered from the stone. For several endless seconds, nothing happened. Then, with painful slowness, its head turned, not toward the forest, not toward the road, toward the house, toward Ethan's window. Even from that distance, he felt certain it was looking directly at him, and for reasons he couldn't explain. He immediately stepped away from the glass. For nearly a full minute, Ethan remained frozen in the middle of his bedroom. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he stared at the window from several feet away, unwilling to step back toward the glass. Every instinct told him not to look again. Yet curiosity slowly began to overpower his fear. Maybe he had imagined the figure turning toward him. Maybe it had simply finished circling the boulder. He took a slow breath and forced himself back to the window. The clearing lay exactly where he had left it. The moon still illuminated the massive boulder near the tree line. The figure was still there. Only now it wasn't standing beside the rock. It was walking toward the house. Its pace remained unnaturally slow, almost lazy, as though it had nowhere else to be. Each step carried it a little farther across the clearing without the slightest hint of urgency. Its long arms hung motionless at its sides now, no longer scratching the stone, but the deep grooves remained clearly visible across the surface of the boulder. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The thing had definitely changed direction, and it was definitely approaching. This time he didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered almost immediately. 911, what's your emergency? Ethan looked back toward the window. I'm not exactly sure. The words sounded ridiculous, even to him. There's someone outside my house. Are they attempting to enter your home? No. Are they threatening you? I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair. They've just been walking around outside. The dispatcher paused. Sir, are they armed? I can't tell. Ethan watched the figure continue its slow approach. It looks like they're coming toward my house. That was enough. The dispatcher assured him that a deputy had been notified and instructed him to stay inside with all the doors locked until officers arrived. After ending the call, Ethan hurried downstairs. He checked every lock twice: the front door, the back entrance, every window he could reach. Everything remained secure. When he returned to the bedroom a few minutes later, the figure had crossed nearly half the clearing. It still moved with the same unnerving slowness, never speeding up, never hesitating, just walking. The moon drifted free from a passing cloud, casting brighter light across the clearing. For the first time, Ethan noticed details he hadn't been able to see before. A dark jacket, blue jeans, worn hiking boots. Something about the clothes felt strangely familiar. He leaned closer. The figure lowered its head slightly as it walked. Its face remained hidden in shadow. But the jacket. Ethan knew that jacket. His confusion slowly replaced his fear. No way. He narrowed his eyes. The dark flannel-lined work jacket looked almost identical to one his best friend Mike wore every fall. Ethan had seen him wearing it dozens of times over the years, usually during camping trips or weekend hikes. The more he looked, the more convinced he became. The build matched, too. Mike was about the same height, the same broad shoulders. Even the slow walk somehow looked familiar. A nervous laugh escaped Ethan. Seriously? The realization seemed absurd. Mike loved practical jokes. He always had. Years earlier, he'd hidden inside Ethan's garage for nearly an hour just to scare him when he came home from work. Another time, he'd convinced Ethan that someone was living in his attic by secretly recording footsteps above the ceiling. This would absolutely be something Mike would do. The long claws suddenly seemed much less important. Probably fake. Some Halloween prop attached to gloves. The scratching against the boulder? Maybe there had been metal tools hidden in his hands. Once Ethan convinced himself it was Mike, dozens of impossible details suddenly became explainable. He actually laughed. Relief flooded through him so quickly that he felt almost embarrassed about calling the police. He slid the bedroom window open. Cold autumn air rushed into the room. "Mike!" His voice echoed across the clearing. The figure stopped walking. For several seconds, it remained completely still. Then, very slowly, it turned its head toward the house again. "Nice one," Ethan called. "You almost got me." No response. The figure simply stood there. "You can knock it off now." Still nothing. Ethan frowned. Normally, Mike would have started laughing by now, or at least waved. Instead, the figure remained unnaturally motionless, watching. The silence stretched on long enough to become uncomfortable again. Finally, Ethan sighed. "You're an idiot." He closed the window. Maybe Mike was trying to keep the joke going. Maybe he wanted Ethan to come outside. Not happening. Instead, Ethan picked up his phone again and called the sheriff's office. The same dispatcher answered. 911. Hi, it's me again. He rubbed the back of his neck. I think I know who the person outside is. You wish to cancel the response? I think so. Are you certain? Ethan glanced toward the window. The figure hadn't moved. It simply stood there, facing the house. Yeah. He laughed awkwardly. My buddy's just messing with me. The dispatcher hesitated for a moment. If you're certain. I am. She confirmed the cancellation before ending the call. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket and shook his head. He was already planning how he'd get revenge for the prank. He'd never let Mike forget this. Still, something bothered him. Mike usually answered when people talked to him. He certainly didn't stand silently in the middle of someone's yard for several minutes. Ethan looked back toward the window one more time. The figure was still there, perfectly still, waiting. A strange feeling crept back into his chest. There was an easy way to settle this. He unlocked his phone, scrolled through his contacts, found Mike's number, and pressed call. The phone rang only once. Hey, Mike answered casually. What's up? The familiar voice should have reassured Ethan. Instead, it made the silence outside his bedroom feel even heavier. For a second, he didn't respond. He simply stared through the window at the figure standing in the clearing. It hadn't moved, not even an inch. Hello? Mike asked again. Everything okay? Ethan swallowed. Yeah. I just wanted to ask you something. You sound weird. I thought you were outside my house. There was a short pause. What? I thought this was some kind of joke. Mike laughed. What are you talking about? The guy outside. Another pause followed, this one noticeably longer. Ethan. Mike's voice had lost its playful tone. I'm at home? Ethan frowned. What do you mean? I mean exactly that. He heard a television playing faintly somewhere in the background. A dog barked. Someone closed a kitchen cabinet. Normal sounds, everyday sounds. I've been sitting on my couch watching the game for the last hour. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. No, seriously. I am serious. Mike sounded genuinely confused now. Dude, are you okay? Ethan slowly looked back toward the clearing. The figure had begun walking again. The same slow pace. The same deliberate steps. Closer. Closer than before. Its head remained lowered as it crossed the grass. The moonlight revealed more of its clothing now. The jacket, the jeans, even the hiking boots. Everything looked exactly like Mike. Only the way it moved felt profoundly wrong. Its arms swung far too low with every step. Its shoulders barely shifted. Its gait lacked the tiny imperfections every human being naturally had. It looked like someone trying to imitate the idea of walking. Ethan. Mike's voice pulled him back. You still there? Yeah. His own voice sounded shaky. What are you doing right now? Mike chuckled. I literally just told you. No, I mean, Ethan struggled to explain. Can you turn your TV up for a second? What? Just do it. Mike sighed dramatically. You've officially lost me. A moment later, the sound of the television became louder through the phone. Crowd noise, sports commentators, the unmistakable atmosphere of a football game. Mike laughed. Happy? Ethan didn't answer. Because something outside had stopped him cold. The figure had stopped walking again. It now stood less than 50 yards from the house. Its head slowly lifted. Though the distance remained too great to clearly distinguish its face, Ethan somehow felt it staring directly into his bedroom, watching him, listening. Mike. His voice had become almost a whisper. I need you to tell me something. What? Say. He searched for the first words that came to mind. You're an idiot. Mike laughed. Seriously? Just say it. There was another sigh. Then Mike smiled audibly through the phone. You're an idiot. Silence. Nothing happened. Ethan almost laughed at himself. Maybe he really was letting his imagination run wild. Then, several seconds later, something outside spoke. The voice drifted across the clearing with unnatural softness. You're... The word sounded wrong, as though spoken by someone who had never used a human voice before. The pronunciation was almost correct. Almost. Another pause followed, long enough to make Ethan's blood run cold. Then... And... Again, the voice struggled awkwardly with the word, like someone sounding out unfamiliar syllables. Another delay. Finally. Idiot. Ethan stopped breathing. His eyes remained locked on the figure. It hadn't raised its arms. It hadn't gestured. It simply stood there, speaking. Several seconds after Mike, repeating every word, learning them. Mike was still talking. What the hell was that? Ethan barely heard him. His attention remained fixed outside. Did you hear that? Ethan whispered. Hear what? The voice. What voice? The figure began walking again. Another slow step. Then another. It crossed the clearing with impossible patience. Mike continued speaking through the phone. Dude, you're freaking me out. Ethan ignored him. He wanted proof. More proof. His mind desperately searched for another explanation. Maybe someone had hidden speakers outside. Maybe. Mike. What? Say. He hesitated. I never came to your house. What? Please. Mike sounded thoroughly confused. Okay. He cleared his throat. I never came to your house. Again. Silence. Again. Several long seconds passed. Then the voice outside answered. A pause. Never. Another. Came. Its pronunciation improved. Each word sounded more natural than the last. Two. Another step toward the house. Your. Closer. House. This time the sentence sounded almost perfect. Not quite. There was still something hollow about it. Something empty. But it was learning. every repetition became more convincing. Ethan slowly backed away from the window. His breathing had become shallow. Mike was still speaking. "Ethan?" No response. "Ethan, answer me." His legs felt weak. There was only one conclusion left. The thing outside wasn't Mike. It had never been Mike. It had simply copied him. His clothes, his shape. Now, his voice. "Ethan." Mike's voice finally rose in alarm. "Tell me what's going on." Ethan opened his mouth to answer. Before he could speak, the figure outside stopped walking. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Then, in a voice that now sounded almost identical to Mike's, it softly said, "Ethan." For several long seconds, Ethan couldn't move. The thing outside had spoken his name with Mike's voice. Not a similar voice. Not something close. It had been perfect. If he hadn't watched the words leave that impossible figure standing in the clearing, he would have sworn Mike himself had been standing outside the window. His entire body felt numb. "Ethan?" Mike's voice still came through the phone. "Dude, you're scaring me." Ethan finally forced himself to answer. "There's something outside." "What do you mean, something?" "I don't know." His eyes never left the figure. "It looks like you." Silence filled the line. Then Mike laughed uneasily. "Okay, that's not funny." "I'm not joking." Another pause. "Ethan, lock your doors." The simple advice somehow snapped him back into reality. He ended the call without another word. The phone immediately began vibrating as Mike tried calling again, but Ethan ignored it. His attention shifted entirely toward surviving the next few minutes. He hurried downstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. Every lock in the house was already engaged, but he checked them anyway. The front door, locked. The back entrance, locked. Every window on the first floor, locked. He even dragged the heavy dining room table in front of the front door, despite knowing it probably wouldn't make much difference if something truly wanted to get inside. His breathing had become quick and uneven. The house suddenly felt much larger than it had only minutes earlier. Every dark corner seemed capable of hiding something. Every hallway looked longer. When he finished checking the last window, he reached for the light switch in the kitchen, then stopped. For reasons he couldn't explain, leaving the lights on suddenly felt wrong. If the thing outside could see him, why make it easier? One by one, he switched off every light in the house. The kitchen disappeared into darkness. Then the living room, the hallway, the porch light. Within moments, only pale moonlight entered through the windows. The cabin became little more than a collection of dark shapes and faint outlines. Ethan stood completely still, listening. Nothing. He slowly returned upstairs. The bedroom felt like the safest place, though he knew that feeling was probably an illusion. If someone, or something, wanted to enter the house, a locked bedroom door wouldn't stop it. Still, closing the door behind him gave him the smallest sense of control. He sat on the edge of the bed. Then, despite every instinct telling him not to, he looked out the window again. The figure had returned to the boulder. It wasn't approaching anymore. Instead, it resumed the exact same pattern he had witnessed when the night began. walking slowly, patiently, always around the rock. One complete circle, then another. Its unnaturally long claws rested against the stone as it moved. Scratch, step, scratch, step. The sound drifted faintly through the night air. Exactly the same rhythm, exactly the same pace. As though nothing had happened. As though it had never walked toward the house. As though speaking with Mike's voice had simply been another part of whatever ritual it was performing. Ethan couldn't stop watching. The repetition became strangely hypnotic. Circle after circle, scratch after scratch, always identical, never changing. His eyes drifted toward the deep grooves carved into the surface of the boulder. There had been only a handful earlier. Now dozens of fresh marks scarred the stone. Some reached nearly halfway across it. No human being could have carved so deeply with bare hands. Scratch, step, scratch, step. The sound continued. Then a horrible realization struck him. His stomach dropped. The police. He had canceled them. He had told the dispatcher everything was fine. He had sent away the only people who might have reached the house before sunrise. What have I done? The words escaped as little more than a whisper. He grabbed his phone immediately. No signal. He frowned. A moment ago, he had been talking to Mike without any problems. He moved closer to the window. Still nothing. One bar briefly appeared, then vanished again. He walked into the hallway. Nothing. The phone searched endlessly for a network before displaying the words he had never expected to see. No service. Panic tightened around his chest. He hurried downstairs again, trying different rooms. The kitchen, the living room, even the front porch. Nothing. It was as though the entire forest had suddenly disappeared from the outside world. The phone vibrated unexpectedly. Mike. Relief flooded through him. He answered immediately. Mike. Only static greeted him. A loud burst of interference crackled through the speaker before Mike's voice briefly emerged. Etha. Static. You there? The connection dissolved again. I'm here. Ethan shouted into the phone. Mike. More static. Fragments of words. Listen. Crackle. Leave. The signal broke apart until individual syllables became impossible to distinguish. Then the call ended. Almost instantly, the phone rang again. Mike. Ethan answered before the first ring had finished. Mike. Silence. Not static this time. Just silence. Then, very softly, he heard breathing. Slow. Steady. Not Mike's voice. Just breathing. The call disconnected. His phone immediately rang a third time. He stared at the screen. Mike's name remained there. His thumb hovered over the answer button. He couldn't bring himself to touch it. The ringing eventually stopped on its own. The cabin fell silent once more. Outside, the scratching continued. Scratch, step, scratch, step. Ethan slowly climbed the stairs, barely noticing his own movements. Exhaustion was beginning to replace adrenaline. His entire body ached from tension. Back inside the bedroom, he sat on the edge of the bed without looking toward the window again. He didn't want to know where the thing was anymore. If it stayed outside until morning. Maybe. Just maybe. he could survive. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds. Then, something scraped gently across glass. Ethan froze. It came again, slow, deliberate. A long fingernail dragging across a window pane. Scratch. His blood turned to ice. The sound wasn't coming from downstairs. It wasn't coming from the first floor at all. It was coming from the bedroom window, on the second floor. Ethan couldn't breathe. He remained frozen on the edge of the bed, every muscle locked in place as the scratching continued across the bedroom window. Scratch, a long pause. Scratch. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't someone trying to force their way inside. It sounded almost curious, like someone slowly dragging a fingernail across the glass just to hear the sound it made. His eyes remained fixed on the dark curtains. He refused to move them, refused to look outside. The figure had been standing beside the boulder only moments ago. That was impossible. The bedroom sat on the second floor. The outside wall beneath the window was smooth cedar siding with nothing to climb. There were no trees close enough to reach the roof. No ladder leaned against the house. Even if someone had somehow climbed up there, he would have heard branches snapping or boots scraping against the wall. Instead, there had only been silence. Then the scratching. His heartbeat pounded painfully in his ears. Slowly, almost against his own will, Ethan pictured the thing clinging to the outside of the wall, its unnaturally long fingers pressed against the siding, its face inches from the window, watching. The thought made him physically sick. Then, the scratching stopped. Instantly. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. The silence that followed felt even worse. Several seconds passed. Then a full minute. Still nothing. Ethan remained exactly where he was, listening so carefully that the muscles in his neck began to ache. The window stayed quiet. Eventually, he convinced himself it was over. Maybe the thing had left. Maybe it had simply moved somewhere else. He stood cautiously and forced himself to look toward the curtains. They hung perfectly still. No shadow appeared behind them. No movement disturbed the moonlight leaking around the edges. Another minute passed. Nothing. The fear inside him slowly loosened its grip, just enough for reason to return. He glanced toward the bedroom door. Should he make another attempt to call for help? Should he lock himself inside the bathroom? Neither idea felt useful. Then another thought occurred to him, almost embarrassing in its simplicity. What if the scratching had never come from the window? Old houses made strange noises. Wood expanded, branches brushed against glass. He desperately wanted to believe that. He let out a slow breath. "You're losing it." The whisper sounded hollow inside the dark bedroom. His eyes drifted toward the floor beside the bed. The space beneath it disappeared into complete darkness. He hadn't looked under there since moving into the cabin. Not because he expected anything. Simply because there had never been a reason. Now there was. He immediately hated the idea. Horror movies had taught everyone the same lesson: never look under the bed. But another part of him argued that leaving it unchecked would be worse. He needed certainty. He slowly knelt beside the mattress. Every movement felt impossibly loud. The wooden floor creaked beneath his knees. His flashlight still rested on the nightstand. His trembling hand reached for it. The beam flickered to life. He hesitated, then slowly lowered the light toward the darkness beneath the bed. Dust. A few forgotten storage boxes. Nothing else? The beam swept from one side to the other, completely empty. Ethan stared for another few seconds before finally sitting back. A nervous laugh escaped him. See? His own voice sounded ridiculous. There isn't anything. He switched the flashlight off and climbed back onto the mattress. The relief didn't last. He had barely settled against the headboard when another sound reached him. A slow inhale directly beneath him. Ethan froze. He didn't blink. Another breath followed, long, deep, as though someone lay beneath the bed with their face pointed toward the underside of the mattress. Breathing. His mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at him not to move, not to look, not to acknowledge it. The breathing continued. Steady, patient, almost peaceful. Then, something shifted beneath the bed. Very slowly. Wood groaned softly under the weight. Ethan's heart hammered so violently he thought he might pass out. His body refused to obey him. He remained completely still for several endless seconds. Then the breathing stopped. The silence returned. It was somehow worse. He couldn't take it anymore. With every ounce of courage he had left, Ethan leaned over the side of the mattress once again. His shaking hand reached blindly for the flashlight. The beam illuminated the floor, the storage boxes, the darkness. At first, nothing. Then something moved. A pale hand emerged from beneath the bed. Its fingers were impossibly long. Each ended in black claws that scraped softly across the wooden floor as they searched for purchase. Another arm followed. Far too thin, far too long. Moving with slow, unnatural precision, Ethan couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. The thing continued crawling forward. Its shoulders slid into view, then its narrow back. It was coming out. Very, very slowly. Ethan remained frozen as the creature continued pulling itself out from beneath the bed. Its movements were slow enough to feel deliberate, almost patient, as though it wanted him to watch every second of it. Long black claws scraped softly across the hardwood floor, leaving thin grooves behind as its impossibly thin body emerged inch by inch from the darkness. It shouldn't have fit. The space beneath the bed was barely high enough for a few storage boxes. Yet somehow, more and more of the creature continued to slide into the room. Its arms were far longer than any human's, hanging almost to the floor, even while it crawled. Its legs bent at angles that made Ethan's stomach turn. Every joint seemed slightly misplaced, as though whoever had created it had only a vague understanding of how a human body was supposed to work. Eventually, the creature stopped moving. It now sat completely outside the bed. Its back faced Ethan. The room fell silent. The scratching had ceased. The breathing had ceased. Even the forest outside seemed to have stopped making sound. The creature remained perfectly still. Its impossibly long arms rested loosely beside its body. Its narrow shoulders rose and fell only slightly, if at all. For one brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to hope. Maybe it hadn't noticed him. Maybe The thought died instantly, without moving its body, without shifting its shoulders, without turning its neck naturally. Its head began to rotate. Slowly, painfully, slowly. The sound reached Ethan before the movement fully registered. A faint series of wet cracks. Pop, pop, pop. The creature's face continued turning farther than any neck should allow. 90 degrees, 180, 270. The movement never stopped. Its body continued facing away from him, while only the head kept turning. 360 degrees. One complete rotation. Then it stopped. The face now looked directly at Ethan. Its eyes had never left him. Not once. Even while the head rotated impossibly around its neck, those pale, unblinking eyes remained locked onto his own. Watching, studying, remembering, Ethan finally saw its face clearly. The skin looked stretched tightly across an unnaturally narrow skull, almost translucent beneath the pale moonlight spilling through the curtains. Its mouth appeared far too wide, extending almost to the sides of its head. The teeth inside weren't sharp. They looked almost human. Too many of them, packed together in uneven rows. For several endless seconds, neither of them moved. Then, very slowly, the corners of its mouth lifted. It smiled. Not like an animal, not like something acting on instinct. It smiled with unmistakable recognition, as though it had finally found exactly what it had been searching for. Ethan's body finally obeyed him. He screamed, or at least he tried to. Only a broken gasp escaped his throat before the creature moved. It crossed the room faster than his eyes could follow. One instant, it remained sitting beside the bed. The next, it exploded forward in a blur of impossibly long limbs. The bedroom disappeared beneath a violent rush of movement. Claws, darkness, the smell of damp earth, a flash of pale eyes. Then, nothing. Deputies from the county sheriff's office arrived shortly after sunrise. The dispatcher had grown uneasy after reviewing the canceled emergency call from earlier that morning. Combined with several failed attempts to reach Ethan afterward, she eventually decided to request a welfare check. The cabin stood exactly as it always had. The front door remained locked. Every window was intact. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside, the house appeared strangely untouched. Coffee still sat in the kitchen from the previous evening. Ethan's phone rested on the bedroom floor. His wallet, keys, and truck remained exactly where they should have been. But Ethan Carter was gone. Search teams spent 3 days combing the surrounding forest. Tracking dogs found nothing. No footprints, no blood, no evidence that anyone had left the property. The only unusual discovery stood near the edge of the clearing. The enormous boulder. Its surface had been carved with hundreds of deep parallel grooves. The marks were far deeper than investigators believed any ordinary tool could have made. One deputy eventually noticed something else. The scratches didn't end at the rock. Fresh grooves continued across the ground, cutting through damp soil and fallen leaves before reaching the side of the cabin. From there, they climbed. Long, perfectly parallel claw marks ran straight up the wooden exterior wall. They didn't stop until they reached the bedroom window. The investigators never found an explanation. Officially, Ethan Carter simply disappeared. His case remains open. No suspects were ever identified. No evidence was ever recovered. Only one detail was quietly omitted from the final report. Every digital clock inside the house had stopped at exactly 2 a.m. So, always remember, if you ever wake to the sound of scratching outside your window at exactly 2 a.m., don't look under your bed.